Good morning, students. Today we are going to learn political science. We will begin learning with a new chapter. Chapter number 4, the United Nations. Students, before beginning with the chapter, let us first know what is the United Nations. The United Nations is an international organization which was established to ensure peace and security among all the countries at the international level. Students, you all know that at the start of the 20th century, two world wars were fought. Life and property were destroyed on a large scale in this war. The First World War was fought in between the years 1914 to 1918. After the destruction caused by the First World War, in order to maintain peace among the nations in the world, the League of Nations was established. But the League of Nations did not succeed at all, and it led to the beginning of the Second World War. The Second World War proved even more destructive than the First World War. After the use of nuclear weapons in the Second World War, the idea took root that such destructive war should be stopped, and it is the collective responsibility of all the nations to do so. All the nations in the world felt that there should be a mechanism to establish world peace. The United Nations was established after the Second World War out of the realization that it would become a mechanism to establish world peace. The United Nations was established to instill this understanding among all the nations that such destructive wars should be stopped and all the nations should collectively take this responsibility. Students, now we have studied about the reasons behind the formation of the United Nations. Let us learn about the process through which the League of Nations was established. On 14 August 1941, the Atlantic Treaty was signed between the Prime Minister of England and the President of America. According to the Atlantic Treaty, it was decided that a permanent mechanism would be set up which would establish international security and peace soon after the Second World War. Detailed discussions were followed on these decisions in the year 1944 and 1945. After these discussions, a draft to the treaty was established and it was agreed to establish an international organization. At San Francisco in America, the representatives of 50 countries drafted the Charter of the United Nations after conducting detailed discussions. As soon as the Second World War got over, this Charter of the United Nations was signed, and soon after it, the United Nations was established. In this way, after the end of Second World War, detailed discussions were held, and on 24th of October in the year 1945, the United Nations organization was formed. The United Nations is an international organization of all the sovereign nations. In the Charter or the draft of the United Nations, the aims, objectives, and principles of the UN are stated. The list of aims, objectives, and principles of the UN helps to address important world issues and to promote world peace. Students, now let us study about the objectives of the United Nations. The United Nations is the world's largest international organization. In the beginning, only 50 countries were members of the United Nations. But today, a total of 193 countries are members of the United Nations organization. All these member nations have come together on a common platform of the United Nations. The headquarters of the United Nations is in the city of New York in America. Thus, all the member countries meet in the headquarters of the United Nations to discuss over the issues and to promote the ideas of establishing world peace. The United Nations has its own definite objectives. Briefly, the United Nations take up all the necessary measures and tasks which are required for establishing international peace. Some of the important objectives of the United Nations include to maintain friendly relations among the member nations, aims to intervene and prevent war, and also ensures that there is cooperation, peace, and brotherhood among the countries in the world. The next aim of the United Nations is to enhance international security by solving international disputes. If any countries in the world are having dispute with other country, then it is the responsibility of the United Nations to solve their disputes in order to maintain international security and to establish international peace. The next objective is to safeguard and to foster human rights and freedom. The United Nations also take care that there is no exploitation or prohibition of the human rights. Apart from these main objectives, the United Nations also aim at enhancing economic cooperation among all the nations at international level. All the member countries of the UN are legally bound by their duty to respect the diplomatic privilege of other sovereign nations, not to attack other countries, or to abide or take any action which is being declared illegal by the international law, and to follow the international law and the treaties. Students, now let us study about the principles of the United Nations. Students, the United Nations is an organization that is created by the sovereign nations coming together. Thus, the United Nations is based on certain principles or rules. The important principles of the United Nations are: first, all the member nations will have the same and equal status. There will be no discrimination done among the nations based on the geographical size, economic, or the military power. Second, all the member nations of the United Nations should respect the freedom and the geographical unity of the other member nations. The third principle is all the member nations should solve their international disputes mutually without getting engaged in any kind of war or in any activity which disturbs international peace. Now, let us study about the structure of the United Nations. The United Nations Charter has described the structure and the functioning of the UN organization. The United Nations has six main organs. They are the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, the International Court of Justice, the Trusteeship Council, and the Secretariat. Now, let us study in detail about these six main organizations of the United Nations. First, the General Assembly. Students, the General Assembly is the representative organ of the United Nations. All the member countries are the members of the General Assembly. In the General Assembly, the representatives of all the member nations, that is, of all 193 countries, participate in the discussions over important issues relating to the world. The position and status of all the countries, whether they are rich or poor, big or small, is the same in the General Assembly. Every year, the General Assembly meets in its session, which is conducted from September to December. During these sessions, the General Assembly discusses important issues like the environment, the disarmament, etc. During the discussions held in the General Assembly, recommendations are also given to the member countries if needed. The General Assembly also has to handle the important issues such as maintaining peace and security, admission of new members in the UN, and also granting financial help to the nation who are the members of the United Nations. All the discussions on these topics in the General Assembly are taken by majority. These discussions are in the form of resolutions. Thus, we can say that the General Assembly only passes resolutions and it does not make any new law. Students, the significance or the importance of the General Assembly is in being a platform for the representatives of the member nations to come together and to discuss and make policy decisions on issues of global importance. The General Assembly does not make any new laws to be binding on the countries. Now, let us study about the functions of the General Assembly. First, to elect the non-permanent members of the Security Council. In the Security Council, there are a total of 15 members, out of which 10 are non-permanent members. Thus, It is the function of the General Assembly to elect these non-permanent members. Second, to choose the United Nations Secretary General and also the judges of the International Court of Justice in consultation with the Security Council. Thus, the appointment of the people in the important post is done by the General Assembly. Third, to pass the annual budget of the United Nations. Students, in order to carry out various functions, the United Nations need money, and through budget it makes arrangement of money and also keeps a record of all the expenses of money. So students, this was all about the General Assembly. Now, let us study about the second organ of the United Nations, that is the Security Council. There are a total of 15 members in the Security Council. Among those 15 members, 5 are the permanent members, while the remaining 10 members are the non-permanent members. The non-permanent members are chosen every 2 years by the General Assembly. The permanent members of the Security Council are the countries of America, Russia, England, France, and China. The permanent members of the Security Council enjoy some of the special powers with it. All the 15 members in the Security Council have the right to cast one vote. This right is enjoyed by both the permanent members and the non-permanent members as well. But the 5 permanent members of the Security Council get a special power in this voting rights. This power is known as the veto power. It means for any decision to be taken by the Security Council, the assent or the permission of all 5 permanent members is necessary. Apart from getting the assent or the permission of all 5 permanent members, also the assent or permission of any 4 non-permanent members is also needed. In short, for making any decision, the permission or assent of all 5 permanent members and any 4 non-permanent members is necessary. Here, the permanent members can use its special power or the veto power. If even one of the 5 permanent members uses his veto power and gives a negative vote, then the decision cannot be taken. So students, we can say that the 5 permanent members of the Security Council has the veto power or the supreme power to give a negative vote and to cancel the decision. If any of the 5 permanent members feels that the decision taken by the Security Council is not correct or it is inappropriate, then it uses its veto power to reject the decision and hence that decision cannot be finalized. Students, it is a worth remembering point that only the 5 permanent members of the Security Council enjoy the veto power. Now, Let us study about the functions of the Security Council. The main responsibility of the Security Council is to maintain international peace and security. The Security Council may suggest any one among the following alternatives in the situations of international conflicts. The Security Council may suggest measures to end or to resolve a conflict and also make efforts to establish peace, impose some economic sanctions, or to take a decision of military action against the aggressor nation. The second function of the Security Council is to prepare policies for arms control. Thus, the Security Council has the right to keep a complete record about the arms and ammunitions the military of the nation has, and also it prepares policies regarding the use of such arms, ammunitions, or weapons. The next function of the Security Council is to play a joint role. The Security Council has the responsibility to help the General Assembly in appointing the judges of the International Court of Justice and also help the General Assembly in appointing the United Nations Secretary General. So students, in this video, we have learned about the United Nations, its objectives, principles, and also learned in detail about two important organs of the United Nations. We will study about the remaining organs in the next session. Thank you.